Viva! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Rob Donaldson. He does such an amazing job with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He does great work over at Underdog Fantasy and so much more. We're going to chat with him about the fact that Louisville made a big splash over the weekend, signing a top 5 guy in the class of 2027, getting him to reclassify into 2026 in the 7-footer in Kenzie. Hopefully I got the last name correct, but they have made so many moves here, bringing in Obiana, Okenzie, and so much more. So we'll talk about that and if they might need to change their style a little bit more. And here at segment number 1, the big news that we saw on Monday, and we had this news come out after I did the chat with Rob, or else I would have addressed this as well. The fact that Tennessee, they might be looking a little bit different this year, but they made a big signing in Juke Harris. We'll lead off with that. And then in the final segment, all the non-Juke Harris and Tennessee news and notes, those will be recapped, everything that we saw on Monday. We'll do that in the final segment. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUDit_81. Keep in mind, largely the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I do beg it to you, I do plead it to you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions. It helps the offseason go by a little bit faster. But for Tennessee, the rich get richer, and I don't think that I can put them above Florida right now in terms of the just way too early SEC rankings right now. But boy, oh boy, Tennessee, a team that typically has a lot of retention. Typically, they're more of a defense-oriented team. We're going to talk about this in the next few days if they might be changing their style a little bit. But this is a new-look roster. You're bringing Juke Harris, 21.5 points, 6.5 boards per contest. Last season over at Wake Forest, mid-30s three-point shooter. All of a sudden, he becomes one of those main wing players for this team. And you just look at the moves that they made here in the offseason. You bring in Jalen Harrelson, who became that top scorer over at Notre Dame after you saw the Marcus Burton injury go down. Miles Rubin is still going to be able to give this team a rough and tumble down low, coming over from Loyola Chicago. Right now, Tyler Lundblade is probably your 6th man at this point. If I were to guess, you've got Day-Day Ames, who comes over from Cal, along with Virginia. Terrence Hill, he's coming on over from VCU. Brandon Skip-to-my-Lou gives you a little bit of depth down low. It does feel like Tennessee, much like Louisville, is becoming one of those Noah's Ark teams where they've got 2 of everything. Heck, they've also got a guy in Dwayne Brown, who I think has a little bit of upside as well. Tennessee has done an absolutely tremendous job here in the transfer portal in terms of revamping for this upcoming season. And again, I've been saying this, a lot of the teams that finished in the top 10 last year, a lot of the teams that made the Elite 8, Final 4, I see them being able to get back. Tennessee, who has made the Elite 8 now, if I'm not mistaken, each out of the last 3 years, it feels like they're very poised to get back. Rick Barnes is getting up there in years, and I know that a lot of people talk about Rick Barnes choking in the NCAA tournament and everything like that, but last few years, things have been much better for him. This is now pretty much do or die mode because this team has went all in. They are very much pushing their chips into the table, being able to spend all this money on this roster. It's a little bit strange that they have a little bit less retention than what I was expecting, but boy, oh boy, this does look like a team that's going to be able to score. Can Rick Barnes be able to instill his defense into some guys that, let's call it what it is, maybe they're not the best offensive players? That's going to be a little bit of a question, but Rick Barnes, I think that he's going to be up for the task, and man, this has been a huge offseason for Tennessee. So big moves out there, and it's always a big move to get this man on the podcast, Rob Donaldson. He does such great work over at Underdog Fantasy, looking at this great sport of college basketball. He joins me next radio on Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. It's always great to be joined by this man as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such an amazing job. Take a look at this great sport of college basketball as he does the show Rob's Best Bets over on youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. Right now, this time of year, he's doing an amazing job taking a look at all things on the baseball front, but all 12 months of the year, he's getting set for college basketball, whether that's placing bets or looking at what we're all getting in terms of these moves in the offseason. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether, and always appreciate it, Rob. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, we talk about it every single episode here, but college basketball right now is a sport that really just never stops. There's always going to be storylines with how the structure of the sport is set. And because of that, we're talking about it here at the start of May. A lot of months to go until we actually have games left. But right now, this is where the teams are being built, and there's definitely things to be talking about here.
Yep, no question about it. And when it comes to college basketball, you've talked quite a bit about how you like the moves that Louisville has made in the offseason. Well, apparently Louisville was not done. Not only are they getting Flory Badunga, not only are they getting Jackson Shellstead, Alvarez Fogarius coming over from Iowa, but they got a guy that was supposed to be in the 2027 class in Obiana Akenzie, and now he's going to be in the class of 2026, a true 7-footer. How do you take a look at this Louisville team? Because I kept saying it the last few days, and I'll keep saying it once again. It feels like they're Noah's Ark with two of everything.
I think it just kind of speaks to, again, that with the addition of the transfer portal and the relevance of the transfer portal now, where you have so many players entering that system, all of a sudden you have these pockets of time for programs who, if they want to go out and get it, if they want to go kind of chase that quote unquote ring, or even just kind of stack a roster for a one-time given season, they have the opportunity to do so. And it's going to be an interesting kind of case study, 10, 15 years down the line, when we are looking back at these early kind of Wild West stages of the portal, if there are some teams that just kind of blurbed up for one season and then fell off a mountain. I think part of that, obviously, it goes hand in hand with, okay, the endowment, the funding. Was it a consistent sort of push to be a great basketball program, or was it just kind of like, hey, we want to get that one ring for the program and then kind of go from there? Whether Louisville ends up even getting to that mountaintop is going to be the question, right? Because they haven't tasted it in a while since Rick Pitino. But you got to think that this is probably one of the better windows they've ever had since the Pitino era. And I'm kind of excited here for it.
Yep, I very much am as well. And do you think that with all the signings that we've had in the offseason for Louisville, that they might change their style just a little bit? Not to say that they're going to make wholesale changes, but last year they were a top 5 team in terms of percentage of their shots that came from 3, and that doesn't necessarily seem conducive to bringing in a top-flight 7-footer, Flory Badunga, and all these guys. And it does feel like perhaps there might be a little bit of a change with the way that Louisville plays their offense.
100% agree. And that's ultimately, I think, the biggest question or the biggest hesitation that I do have is, I love the aggressiveness. I love getting players who can stretch the floor, who can rebound, can do a lot of the things that Louisville under Pat Kelsey so far in this tenure have not been able to do. That said, we know what Pat Kelsey's distinct style is. Can a coach like this in this type of era where basically your personnel is going to kind of dictate what your style of ball is going to be? Can it change the entire, makeup or cut from the cloth that we've seen Pat Kelsey be at Winthrop, Charleston, and now at Louisville? This is going to be the case study, right? Because if they fall flat on their face, I don't think Louisville's going out there and dropping millions in the portal to the same degree that they are this season. And that kind of goes back kind of round point to what I was saying earlier of, are we going to see some kind of these blurb teams of thinking, hey, let's go out there and get it. We can go get it right now. Then they fall flat in their face, and all of a sudden the endowment or the funding kind of comes to a little bit of a halt, it's going to be that case study. And honestly, I'm excited for it because one way or another, it's either going to set a precedent or it's going to be laughed at. And that's going to be its own form of entertainment.
Absolutely. Either way, we're going to be getting ourselves some good, clean family fun. It's like the movie, I don't know if you've ever seen Robin Hood Men in Tights, but they were saying we're either getting a hanging or a wedding. Either way, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's always a lot of fun to be able to quote some of those movie quotes, what have you. As we do have Rob Donaldson, he does such great work over at the show/podcast, Rob's the Best Bets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I've been saying it on the podcast quite a bit. I think that's worth reiterating as well. It feels like it's not just Louisville. It's really been the entire ACC that's really been stepping up to the plate. Obviously, you knew that Duke was going to be adding pieces, add in their John Blackwell. They have a really, really good recruiting class, and I cannot put Louisville over Duke right now because, man, that's just absolutely tremendous right there. But I mean, the likes of Boston College and Syracuse being able to step up. Pittsburgh, I don't know if it works out, but at the very least, they've signed them 100 billion guys here in the offseason. It's as if the ACC has looked themselves in the mirror, and they're really trying to reverse course this season.
Yeah, especially for these high major teams, and the ACC is a well-funded, league for the most part, top to bottom. You're talking about the individual teams and even the teams that were kind of aligning the bottom over the recent seasons. They've gone out there and got their guy, right? We just talked about Louisville, attracting Pat Kelsey. Well, Virginia got Ryan Odom, and North Carolina's breaking in a new head coach. Miami's breaking in a new head coach. NC State, SMU is in year 2 of Andy Enfield. Florida State, you have a lot of these coaches not really kind of being mainstays in the league. It's kind of go and get it now type of coaches. And so it does create a window of that initial excitement because kind of, talking about that point of whether or not we're going to see these blurb up teams through the portal. Well, there's also going to be kind of a fan interest element when you're talking about the first 3 years of a head coaching tenure. I look at an example, Syracuse, where it hasn't felt like there's been life in that building for a while now. Even if you go back to the Boeheim era, at the end of the Boeheim era, it was kind of very stagnant. It kind of felt like it had run its course truly. And all of a sudden, they bring in Jerry Mack. He's bringing in some of Sienna guys. And all of a sudden, it kind of opens up your eyes of like, hey, can this be a Ben McCollum-ish kind of situation where we saw Sienna take it to Duke? They were ahead at halftime as a 16 seed over a 1. Potentially could be kind of a fun little middling team that we've seen the ACC take a giant leap forward. And I'll tell you, when you look at kind of some of those middling ACC teams that have been aligning the middle over recent seasons, there is a lack of push from some of those teams. And so from that standpoint, again, I just kind of think it opens the door for some of those bottom feeders over recent seasons to kind of make their way up into that top 5, top 6.
Yep, I absolutely have loved what I've seen out of the ACC here in the offseason. I think that they've done a great job. And then also looking at the bottom half of the Big 12, it feels like a lot of teams that they sort of just had rough seasons last year. They're looking to reverse course. West Virginia in season number 2, they bring in Jusan Sanan over the weekend. They've made some relatively good moves. Obviously, Randy Bennett going on over to Arizona State is big. Casey Alexander going on over to Kansas State. Cincinnati, they've made so many great moves here in the offseason. And I really feel like there's a lot of teams across college basketball that maybe they didn't have a great year this last year, but to what you were talking about before, maybe if it doesn't work out this year, they dial back the funding, but it feels like the teams that missed the NCAA tournament, they're spending to get back in it this year.
Yeah, and obviously Iowa State is a team that for the first time in a while has kind of seen a major facelift, and they're one of the teams I would almost kind of put in the Pitt category, which is kind of crazy to say. Obviously, love TJ Otzelberger a little bit more as a head coach than I do Jeff Capel, but when you look at the additions that Iowa State has made in the portal, it was kind of volume over quality, in my opinion. Whether or not that works out just because they have a great system, they have a great culture, and they know how to identify talent, we will see. Certainly the transfer portal has paid dividends for them early on during this time of year. But I think also when you're looking at one of the mainstay top teams right now, when we're talking about the Big 12, that has been Kansas over recent years, but it's been a very, very sloppy Kansas over recent years. And they're bringing with a lot over with the freshman class, but with the transfer portal, they've almost kind of fallen behind, whether intentionally or otherwise. So it's going to be a really interesting test case on whether or not Kansas can kind of break the norm with just some fresh faces from a young high school recruiting ranking standpoint, or whether or not they're just going to kind of fall into the same void that they've been falling into. So when you do have teams near the top who are kind of susceptible, they're wobbled a little bit or they're a little bit unknown, again, that's always going to breed excitement when you're talking about the middle and the bottom to potentially take a major step forward. And last year we saw a team like a TCU really take advantage of that. We'll see what ends up happening here as we kind of move on.
Yep, and I think that's just a really interesting landscape in college basketball because I've been talking about these teams doing a lot of spending, trying to be able to rise up, but at the same time, as we know, the teams that were in the top 5, top 10 last season, they're bringing back a lot of their rosters from a season ago. They've done a nice job in terms of improving. And when you take a look at the landscape of college basketball, do you think that we could have a case where a lot of these same teams that were in the top 10 last year are back there this year, but we just get a big, giant middle in college basketball with all these power conference teams, perhaps?
Well, this has kind of been my take is so far with the transfer portal is you're seeing a lot of the same common denominators in terms of teams who are willing to invest in their basketball programs. And year over year, because there is that massive investment, whether or not they reach the ultimate height of winning championships, I think is a question. But you are still going to see the Dukes of the world, the North Carolinas of the world. Heck, even kind of look down the list of a Gonzaga, for example, being a heavy investor. Those teams will have a high floor in terms of how they perform. Now, this is, again, kind of the opportunity where you might get a whole string of teams that kind of emerge themselves out of this hole. And that's where I think the product of college basketball ends up taking a massive leap forward, the same way I think it has over recent seasons where the middle, not necessarily the bottom, not necessarily the teams in the mid-major level are kind of, pulling off like the high point that we saw last season, but more so those 8, 9 seeds, the 7 seeds, the 6 seeds, really take strides over in terms of their quality of play. Because I think obviously when you look at the NBA draft, for example, and the lack of players who are leaving the sport, that means that the talent is bubbling up within the high school ranks. It's staying retained. That's going to lead to a higher level of play inherently. And I think we start to see that. At the same time, I kind of feel like those top end teams that we see every single year with the heavy investment are going to still stay very good. And I think their level of play gets bumped up ever so higher because of that player retention.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I absolutely love what we've been seeing out of a lot of these teams thus far in the offseason. And Rob, is there maybe a team or two that we have yet to talk about that you have your eye on them with regards to what they've done in the offseason? Maybe it's a positive team that we've looked at, or maybe it's a negative team that you just feel like it's been a little bit of a random offseason for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams for me that end up kind of fitting that bill to a degree. And what's kind of interesting, and we've talked about, coaches that want to feel inspired by and coaches that, we really want to make that push to see how far they can bring it. Well, I look at a team like a St. John's, and this is going to be a very continuity heavy team. This is also going to be a team that isn't featuring a lot of the transfer portal talent. I know that's kind of been the topic of the season so far because that's what's in front of us and ongoing and prevalent. But what's going to really elevate St. John's to move past where they were last season? I don't necessarily know if I know the answer to that. And so what are we going to see from obviously a great head coach who has moved the St. John's program forward, but not necessarily into the chasing championships level or chasing championships height just yet in this tenure? Will we see it? I don't necessarily know because I've been a firm believer on this. When you look at the championship teams of the last 3 years, a lot of transfer portal talent. It's not like they're just kind of staying continuous and kind of relying on the guys they have. They're bringing in guys to make a major difference. And so the St. John's program, heck, we even just talked about Kansas. I don't necessarily know what a lot of these kind of big prominent programs with big prominent head coaches are doing to take that next extra leap, because they do need that leap. And it's just going to be something that we end up finding once the season actually comes into fold.
Yep, it certainly is going to be interesting to be taking a look at that and so much more. And we are going to have ourselves a lot to be taking a look at here the next few months. We've got a lot that has already happened here in the offseason. And Rob, you're doing such a great job of being able to keep notes of it all. You do an incredible job as well on the baseball front too. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's always a blast talking hoops with you, my man. And for those who are wanting to follow my bets once the season starts and also want to follow my Major League Baseball bets, Twitter/X at RobDFB on Twitter, and also on YouTube, just my name, Rob Donaldson. But As always, Greg, I appreciate having you on, man.
It is always great to be able to get Rob aboard. He's doing such an amazing job looking at this great sport of college basketball, and every single time he joins me on such great insights. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, let's give you guys a roundup of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Well, it was great to be able to get our guy, Rob Donaldson, aboard. He does such a great job with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Florida has obviously so much retention from a season ago, pretty much other than Olivier Roux, that 7'9" gentleman that decided to go to UC Irvine along with Micah Handlogden. They returned that entire low post from a season ago with Ruben Chinyelu being able to come back, being able to bring back Thomas Haw. And the big thing that they needed was three-point shooting. Looks like they went the international route. They're bringing in a 22-year-old Doman Petrovic from Slovenia, who was averaging 16.5 points at a professional level for KK Senkur. Hopefully I got that correct. 7 boards. He was popping it from three-point range at over 35%. He's going to be coming on over for Florida. It looks like the big bad wolf out there in the SEC. Tennessee has obviously made so many great moves as well, so I don't feel like you can go wrong there. We're going to talk with our good friend Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16 a little bit later on in the week, taking a look at these prime SEC rosters and the fact that LSU is still not doing really a whole lot of anything whatsoever. LSU, you can sign some guys. You need to fill out a roster. I have eligibility still. I only use 2 years of college bowling eligibility. So if you need Greg Peterson is available. But that said, it does feel like we've got some great moves happening out there in the SEC. And that's another one for Florida. You've got K.A. Chadenga. Hopefully I got that correct. Kane Chadenga. And hopefully that's the pronunciation. He's a 6'9" big man that just really could not see minutes out there on the floor last few seasons over at Boston College. He has decided that he is going to be going to Longwood, and it's a Longwood team that over the last few seasons has been very strong down low. They are really going to need to revamp themselves in terms of their three-point shooting. That was just absolutely miserable last season. But for Longwood, they've been able to make some solid moves here in the offseason. Domas Kazonis, who is a starter over at UNC Greensboro at 6'8", is coming over. Lazar Misevich, he was over at Duquesne at 6'10". He's coming over. They have added a lot of size. I do like the fact that they pick up Ben Wenson. He was a shooting guard over at Vermont last season. And Obo Yarma, who is a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player, comes over from South Carolina as well. Seems like this team is going to try to overwhelm the Big South with size, and as a lot of these mid-major programs and these mid-major just conferences in general have gone downhill, it feels like the spending out there in the Big South has really been able to ramp up. Even schools like USC Upstate, it feels like are making some relatively solid moves, so do like to see that one. This is one that is massive for the mid-majors. How about Aaron Bradshaw, a former top 10 recruit? Recognize that pretty much everywhere they went, it's not necessarily panned out for him, but that said, he's heading on over to Tennessee State. A true 7-footer that's able to pop it from three-point range. Last year, he spent it with a Memphis program that, let's call it what it is. Memphis is always an adventure, to say the least. Was averaging about 8.5 points, 4 boards, shot 33.3% from three-point range. Never has become truly the rebounder that he should be at 7 feet tall, but I do think that in this system, I think that it's going to be very, very good for him, as Tennessee State was able to be a really good rebounding and a really good defensive team last season under Nolan Smith, who's really formed himself to be a really good coach in general, was able to lead Tennessee State to the NCAA tournament. They haven't necessarily had like rambunctious moves here in the portal, but Daniel Vieira Tuck, he was also at Memphis. He's coming over as well. They pick up Isaiah Stewart from Northern Illinois. Deandra Lindsay, he's a 6'8" big man who comes over from Iona. Looks like Tennessee State is going to be doubling down and tripling down in terms of size, being able to have that versatility, having a top 10 recruit over at Tennessee State. At the time, he was a top 10 recruit coming on over. That is absolutely huge for them, so you'll love to see that for Tennessee State. Nate Deere spent last year over at Oakland, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Canisius, and for Canisius, it's a squad that over the last few seasons has just been really tough in general for them to be able to get online. The offense was quite a bit worse last season, but the defense after it was just absolutely atrocious. Year number one in this coaching regime, it did look quite a bit better last year as well, and they've done a nice job in terms of signing some guys. Deere is a 6'9", little bit of a combo player. Nate Faust was solid over at Lemoyne last season. Vinny Sangona was over at East Texas A&M. He was able to average 8+ points per game. He was able to pop it relatively well from 3-point range. For Deere, just wasn't able to see a lot of playing time over at Oakland. He was only averaging about a point per contest, and he's a guy that's really not going to be stretching the floor, popping it from 3. And for Canisius, with all their rebounding issues the last few seasons, they really need someone like that. I think that he's going to be able to find a home here, and I do think that this is a really nice ad for them. This is a pretty solid one for Towson, as they're going to be bringing in Delis Baladu, who is over at Rutgers this last season. 6'9" gentleman that actually began his life over there at Italy. 3 points per game. He's able to pop it a little bit from 3-point range. That's not necessarily his forte, but he should be able to fit this Towson system really, really well. When Towson is at their peak, they're an amazing rebounding team. Not a team that's really going to light you up from 3-point range. Last year, they were one of the lesser 3-point shooting teams, one of the lesser free throw shooting teams in all of college basketball, but Scary Ball is very much based around good, solid defense. I recognize that Rutgers certainly was not necessarily the world's greatest defensive team last season, but I do think that these guys are going to be very rock solid moving forward. And for Towson, they've done a nice job adding a few other guys. Ben Rosenborough, he was over at San Jose State last season. The Zion Stanford ad from Villanova. I think that they've done a nice job having a little bit of a collective of guys. He's mainly the main big man that's going to be coming in, so I do think that this is going to be able to help fortify them moving forward. We should once again see this team being back to where they have been in the past. Not necessarily a team that's going to be intimidating with regards to offense, but should be a rock-solid defensive team. You've got Dang Garang. Hopefully I got that correct. He was over at Lemoyne last year. He's decided that he's going to be going to Illinois State. Now, Illinois State, I think, is going to be able to have themselves a solid year once again this year, but they do lose so many of those veteran pieces from a season ago. Perhaps a 5-5 rule is going to be able to help them out a little bit, but for Garang, he last season was a pretty solid player over at Lemoyne, a Lemoyne team that they were one that really did a nice job having versatility at 6'6", 11 points, 5 boards, shot 34% from 3-point range. I don't know if he's the caliber of a player that you'd want starting at a school like Illinois State, but at the same time, if you're utilizing him as a little bit more of a depth piece, as Illinois State was a little bit of a hit or miss 3-point shooting team, if you're able to have him to be able to guard multiple positions, I think that that's big. They're already bringing in Demarion Birch as well. He was over at Bradley last season. Jackson King, I thought was a really nice ad coming over from Missouri State as well. A guy that's able to give you double figures, a guy that's going to be able to give you some handles as well. Still feel like the job is not done for Illinois State because they do lose so much of that roster from a season ago, but certainly steps in the right direction as well. For IU Indy, it's going to be very interesting to see what they give you for this upcoming season. They really haven't added a ton here in the transfer portal yet, but they do get on the board here on Monday as they're going to be bringing in Gus Etchison. Hopefully I got that correct. He's heading on over after he was over at Idaho State. They're also going to be bringing in Manzea Stackhouse Jr. He was a freshman over at Alabama A&M. Jason Clark, he also comes over from Appalachian State. That was from a few weeks ago. He should really be your big ad for Etchison. He was averaging about 8.5 points per game last year over at Idaho State at 5'11". He should be able to fit the system. He's a guy that began his life out there in the great state of Indiana, shot 35% from 3-point range. Stackhouse, a little bit more of an ancillary piece, but it looks like Etchison is a guy that should be able to come in. He should be able to fit the system really well, so I like this ad for IU Indy. Been a little bit of a silent offseason here for Campbell because they did lose their coach John Andrewtuck because they weren't really spending a lot of money and sticking a lot of resources into college basketball, but they're adding in their A.J. Wright Jr. He was the SAC Player of the Year, if you're wondering what conference that is. That would be non-Division One, as A.J. Wright Jr. at 5'8", was able to be relatively solid last season. He was averaging about 2.6 steals per contest at the Division II ranks. He was averaging only about 9.5 points per game, so looks like he's going to be a little bit of a defensive stopper for a Campbell team that is going to be looking to turn over a new leaf this season. For Campbell, they really haven't signed a lot of guys in the Division I ranks in terms of transfer portal. They made Jimmy Williams their new head coach after he was over at Division II Anderson, so he's bringing with them another guy that was playing at the D2 ranks last season, so we're seeing a lot of that going on. And as a matter of fact, for A.J. Wright, he was playing in that system last season, so there's a little bit of camaraderie there for Campbell. We need to see them probably pick up a few more of these Division I guys, but still a solid ad for them. And Campbell, they are trying to be able to fill out that roster with Oklahoma. They're looking to add some yak. Last season was over at Oregon State. He has decided that he is going to be going to Oklahoma for the Sooners. It's been a relatively solid offseason for them thus far. Adding in their Pop Isaacs is something I like. Connie Ruth's I felt like he deserved a few more minutes over there at Louisville. Now you add in there a little bit of upside guy in Yak Yak. He was not necessarily laying the world on fire last season when he was over at Oregon State, but he is a guy with a 6'11" body, and he did begin his career over at New Mexico State. Again, wasn't necessarily a guy that lit the world on fire over there, but saw some relatively okay minutes this past season. He's able to pop a few threes. It's not necessarily a guy that's going to be going into inferno mode from three-point range. So for Oklahoma, it's a program that is going to be in a little bit of transition. I do think that this could be a year in which they get a little bit more back to the roots of Porter Moser and what he was able to do over at Loyola Chicago that made him so successful. I do like the fact that they added in there Tyler Hendricks, who's going to be a nice three-point shooter as well, but it is going to be a group that isn't going to quite have the same backcourt as a season ago because you've got so many of these guys are just flat out of eligibility from a season ago, but they do add a big body here, and if you're relying upon Yak Yak to be a guy that's going to be playing mono minutes for Oklahoma, that would be a little bit rough, so I think that this is going to be more of a depth piece add rather than anything else. David Horanci, he's a little bit of an international man of mystery. He's going to be coming on over after he was playing some basketball over in Italy, and he should be able to give this team just a nice little bit of, shall we say, versatility. He was a nice three-point shooter over in Italy, a guy that's able to handle a little bit as well. Should be able to help this team out defensively as well. San Diego State is also adding in there Nick Anderson, who was a solid double-figure scorer over at Rice last season. Chance Glayden, who was a great three-point shooter over at Boston U, a part of a slow and controlled sideline. Jeremiah Cherry, who he was solid in the few minutes that he played over at Sacramento State, but really couldn't stay out there on the floor. It is a team that's in a bit of transition, losing Magoon Gwath and a few others during the offseason. That was a little bit rough for them, but overall, I do like the moves that they're making, and I do think that they're going to get back to that just hard-nosed defensive system in general, and then for Auburn, they did lose a few guys in the transfer portal in the offseason, and for Murray State, they're looking to be able to take advantage of it, as Caden Magwood has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Murray State. And I really like this ad for Murray State because Magwood did not see a lot of minutes last year. For Auburn, he was really lost in the shuffle of a lot of guys. He was able to see some more minutes in the NIT, though, and when he got a shot in the NIT, he was able to show his worth. He's a former top 100 recruit this past year, 3.6 points, 1.8 assists per game. Only shot about 28% or so from three-point range. It was a relatively limited amount of opportunity in general, but you go back to what he was able to do in the NIT in that first game where things looked like they were going to be going a little bit awry against South Alabama. He really bailed the team out in that one. He was able to supply the team with 14 points in that game. Didn't do a ton else for the rest of the NIT in terms of scoring. He was able to give the team a little bit on the defensive side of things, a few assists. It feels like he's going to be a little bit more of a facilitator than anything else for Murray State. Might be a little bit better shooter than what he showed this past season, but for Murray State, they were a team that they really forced things inside last season. They've got themselves a nice backcourt, in my opinion, also bringing in their Christian Jones from George Washington. Sean DePula was a solid rebounder over at Valparaiso, so I do like the way that Murray State is building up this roster. Do need to be a little bit better with regards to the defense than they were a season ago, but I think that Magwood is going to be able to help out on that end as well, and this is going to be able to help out as well. You've got Kevin DeKovanich, hopefully I said that correct. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Middle Tennessee, so a lot of Tennessee schools getting in on the act. On Monday, you saw the Volunteers, you saw Tennessee State, and you saw Middle Tennessee all have ads. He was over at North Alabama last year, and really other than Eli Rice, who was playing over at Penn State last year, was a little bit of a solid reserve for them. They haven't added a lot here in the offseason, but for DeKovanich, he was shooting about 34% from three, 12 points, 2 assists per contest at 6'4". It was a very down North Alabama team, but at the same time, he was one of the few bright spots for them. It's a Middle Tennessee team that I would like to see them be able to pick up a few guys that were maybe able to generate turnovers, because for Middle Tennessee, it felt like that's what really made them successful a few seasons ago. They just haven't been able to make as much, shall we say, hay with regards to the defensive pressure that they were able to the last few seasons, so that's a little bit of a concern, but I do like this pickup for them, and I do think that he's going to be able to fit the system relatively well. I think that this is a great add as well. Kelron House, he was over at Southern Illinois this last season. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Texas State. He was a great defensive player over at Southern Illinois. He was one of the few guys that could give you anything whatsoever from three-point range as well. 15 points, 3.5 boards, 3.3 assists, 1.7 steals per game for a team that was very rock solid on the defensive side of things. Offensively, they left a whole heck of a lot of something to be desired, and for Southern Illinois, they were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball, but now he goes over to a Texas State program that was in the bottom 5 last year in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that come from three-point range. They were a team that had a little bit of a tough time taking care of the ball. House should be able to help out a little bit with that. He certainly fits the system in terms of generating turnovers. For Texas State, they also bring in Ronald Jessamy, who was able to average 2+ blocks per contest over at Cal State Bakersfield last year. Meet for the Roadrunners. KJ Younger, who saw great minutes last year over at UNC Greensboro, and Texas State just doubling down on what has all worked for them. So I love this pickup for them. And then you've got Jacksonville, who's been able to have themselves a relatively nice offseason as well. They're going to be picking up a man from Wofford in Rex Sterling, and he last season over at Wofford was able to see some relatively solid minutes. Not a guy that was like absolutely lighting the world on fire or anything like that, but for Jacksonville, they're a team that has really just whiffed in terms of transfer ads that they made, and in past off seasons, they really haven't invested a lot in it. But for Sterling, last year, 5.1 points, 3.1 rebounds per game at 6'8". He's not going to have versatility and really bomb it from three, but under Coach Mincy, Jacksonville was never a team that really was going to be looking to bomb it from three. They were built a little bit more around good rebounding, good solid defense, and I feel like they've been able to get back to that a little bit. Adding in there Jamie Phillips, who was a top scorer over at Stetson last year. Namia Turner, he comes over from Minnesota at 6'11". They're bringing in their Caleb Williams, no, not the Bears quarterback, but double-figure scorer from Lafayette, James Merrill, who was over at South Carolina State, who was able to give you some three-point shooting. Now you add in there a little bit more of a true post presence that should be able to help you out in terms of your interior offense, should be able to help you out with regards to being able to hit the boards as well. I do like what Jacksonville has done here in the offseason out there in Atlantic Sun, where a lot of schools have been a little bit slow in terms of adding these guys via the transfer portal. And then you had Andre Amasevich, hopefully I said that correct. He was over at Indiana, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Missouri State. Now, over at Indiana, just was really unable to get out there on the floor whatsoever. He's a 6'10", little bit of an international man of mystery. I think it's a solid pickup here for Missouri State. For Missouri State, they have not been a great rebounding team in their first 2 seasons under Conzo Martin. I think that this is going to be able to help them out a little bit, and it's very clear that they are looking to attract this. They also have Isaiah Medina. He was a 7'1" big man coming over from DePaul. Neither of these guys, I think, are going to have versatility to be able to pop it from three. Savage, perhaps he has a little bit of that in his system because he comes on over from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but and said we didn't get to see him out there on the floor whatsoever. But Missouri State, it's very clear that they knew that they were a little bit weak down low. They're looking to be able to address this issue, so I do like the fact that they are doing so. And then you have a guy, Cam Scott, great Scott, who was over at South Carolina last year. He has decided that he's going to be heading on over to Temple. We give our ode to Lane Kiffin, go Owls, and it's been a little bit slow going here for Temple here in the offseason, and it's very clear that with Temple, they do need to do a little bit of a better job in terms of being able to force a bit more ball pressure, a little bit more defense in general. And Scott, a former top 50 recruit, should be able to help give this team a little bit more versatility. He redshirted this last year. In his first year over at South Carolina, he was only averaging about 2.5 points per game, so we've seen him in a relatively limited dose, but I do think that with him being 6'6", he's going to be able to help just fit the system in general because you're looking at versatility in this Coach Fisher style in general. He's a disciple of Micah Shrewsbury is currently over at Notre Dame. He was one of his main assistants when they really had things rocking and rolling over at Penn State. And for Temple, they actually do bring in someone from Indiana, and Jason Drake. He's a guy that didn't see a lot of minutes over there, but he should be able to fit the system. Babacar Njai, he comes from within the conference over at UTSA. Meet for the Roadrunners. He had good versatility. And Des White was a solid scorer and facilitator over at Oregon State. So they've got a lot of nice interchangeable pieces. They're going to be able to sort of mold what they want here. I would say that they need a little bit more three-point shooting. Scott was never really known as a guy that would bomb it from three-point range, but I do think that these are some nice adds here, and we certainly are getting a lot happening in college basketball. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks once again to our guy, Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He joined me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day on this podcast. Here in the offseason, we're taking a look at the news and notes that we're getting in college basketball, and then when we get in season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.